us pray. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be acceptable in thy sight. I heard something at the end of that reading which I wish I'd incorporated into the sermon, which I might figure out where to put it. If not, I'll add it as an addendum at the end. You can never read a passage too many times because you always find something else in it as you read it. So, as our nights grow longer and the world seems to hush under the weight and the grayness of winter, it is really gray out there at the moment, we often find ourselves cloistered and secluded inside our homes, huddling for warmth, waiting for the world to thaw. But the season of Advent whispers an ancient truth. We were never meant to journey these paths of winter alone. In a pull yourself up by the bootstraps kind of culture, choosing communal life is probably kind of radical, but deeply faithful. In our story from the book of Ruth, we find Naomi desperately trying to go alone. She faced loss after loss. The loss of her homeland as a famine uprooted her and pushed her to Moab. The too soon loss of her husband. The unthinkable loss of both of her sons. No wonder she wanted to go alone. Time and time again, those closest to her had died. To be alone must have seemed a much safer emotional alternative. But when alone, there was no one else to lose. Naomi determinedly wanted to return to her homeland alone. Repeatedly, she tried to get both daughter-in-laws to return to their families, but Ruth was very persevering. And I still wonder why, and I don't have an answer for you. It's like, why? Cultural norms and expectations should have sent Ruth running to her family of origin. But Ruth dared to step away from expectation and step towards Naomi. She gave up her family. She gave up her homeland. She most likely gave up the prospect of finding another husband, something her family in Moab would have traditionally helped her with. But I wonder, what did Ruth gain in all of this loss? Her choice probably wasn't merely about devotion. It was about the commitment to the formation of a family that was built not on blood necessarily, but on kinship. On the daring belief that our lives are better when they are intertwined with another. And maybe she saw that in Ruth, that Ruth needed not to be lonely, that Ruth needed someone to walk with her in this journey. Yet this presence with family and kin is not how we often find ourselves today. We may be thousands of miles away from family. We may be continents away from family. We may find it hard even to keep up the connection with local friends and family, using the excuse that we are too busy, our calendars are too complicated. Yet too often that points to the excuse directly to the things we prioritize over social connection with the people that truly matter. And let's remember, just because we are married, that we live with someone, does not mean that we don't also have the capacity to be alone, to have loneliness. Recent studies show that 1 in 2 Americans struggle with social disconnection. We have an epidemic of loneliness. And loneliness not only hurts us on an individual level, but negatively impacts society as a whole. Feelings of isolation hurt our mental and our physical health. Research has shown that loneliness can take the same toll on our bodies as smoking up to 15 cigarettes a day, which is kind of amazing. We just overlook the impacts of loneliness. And my experience as a hospital chaplain has brought me close to the reality of loneliness. There are people in the hospital that have no visitors, possibly for weeks on end. They have little that brings them joy, either in the hospital or at home, other than watching TV. And these lonely people struggle with a multitude of medical problems and multiple hospitalizations. And you see it again and again and again. The weight of loneliness can make you feel forgotten. You begin to wonder if your place in this world matters, if it has any value at all. It becomes easy to get sucked into a cascade of lies. You start thinking that you are the only one carrying this weight of loneliness, the only one who is on the outside looking in to the others. And these feelings snowball into other struggles like inadequacy, insecurity, and insignificance. And we see this with Naomi in this piece I just heard. At the end of the passage, she says, God has treated me harshly. I have nothing but the clothes on the back. But that wasn't true, was it? Ruth walked with her. But in her loneliness and in her struggles, she couldn't see that. I think that's fascinating. And I also wonder if loneliness was the whole part of Ruth's decision to accompany Naomi. For in going with Naomi, she was risking permanent ostracization from her family. But maybe her family relationship wasn't actually that good. We don't actually know. But we know she was journeying to an unknown land with unknown customs and a land that was unlikely to welcome her as a Moabite, for sure. But over these risks, she chose companionship for herself and also creating that companionship for Naomi. In accepting Ruth's desire to accompany her, Naomi was also putting herself at risk, risking the potential loss of yet another family member. Naomi was daring to choose companionship over the fear of loss. And that's a really important thing. I see that so often. People lose so many people that they don't want to risk another relationship because the pain was too hard. And then we cycle into loneliness. We are truly better together. And deep down in her bones, Ruth knew it. And Naomi's grief didn't deter her. Ruth kept moving towards Naomi, embarking on a journey into a new beginning. And as much as Naomi needed Ruth, Ruth needed Naomi. A beautiful picture of mutuality, which is deeply needed in our fractured world as we isolate ourselves. And Ruth and Naomi's journey to Bethlehem mirrors another future trek to the same town by Mary and Joseph. Both journeys held discomfort and uncertainty, yet the travelers take it on together. This kinship echoes through the lineage of Jesus himself as Ruth, a woman who embodied the strength of connection over isolation, is named among the ancestors of Jesus. A Moabite was named. These stories, Ruth and Naomi's, Mary and Joseph's, show us we are not meant to take this world on alone. Yet the season of flickering candles and twinkling lights does have this shadow side, a side that we have to acknowledge has loneliness and grief in it. For many, it feels like anything but the happiest time of the year. And yet this season offers ample opportunity for kinship and connection. We can reach out to the grieving, invite the lonely into our homes and hearts, send letters to those we know that don't get many, call the isolated on the phone. We can show that in God's family, no one has to face their sorrows alone. What would it look like to foster deep connections this season? Not just gatherings marked by exchanging pleasantries, but by sharing your messy, holy, both ways holy, and complicated life. What does it look like to create deep bonds? It certainly isn't just about attending the work Christmas party or the neighborhood potluck. Think for a moment about films that have relationships at their core. When do you see the most bonding and deepening of those relationships? It is rarely in the happy, happy moments. It is most often in the sharing of adversity. That is when meaningful relationships are deepened, when you trust in the messiness that the other will be there for you. That is what creates deep roots of community. This Advent season, I wonder if we can make steps to create new, deep bonds. Can we have a commitment to share our real, messy lives, not our carefully curated Facebook, Instagram, TikTok lives? Can we check in with someone that might be lonely? Or with someone that has experienced loss this year? Or with someone with whom our bonds have been broken and fractured for some reason? God's stories are always of community. From the creating of Adam and Eve to the circling of the women at the crucifixion, God's people always do things together and in community. Let us be God's people this Advent.